Hi, honey family. Welcome back to another episode. I know I took a brief break last week. It was unexpected and unplanned, but sometimes life happens. We're back this week with new, exciting stories, and I hope you enjoy them. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, give me a thumbs up, and sit back and enjoy the show. Story 1. Who called 911? When my children were around the ages of 14, 13, and 9, we lived in an old farmhouse. The house, actually, was right on the county line. My boyfriend was an oil field driller, so he was gone from approximately 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. every day. One night, as he was watching a video that we had rented, there came a knock at the front door. I got up to answer it, and to my surprise, there was 2 county deputies standing there. They asked me, "What's your emergency?" To which I replied, "Excuse me? I have no emergency." The officers went on to explain that they had received an emergency request from my address. I told the officers that we had not called 911. They said okay, that they were sorry to bother me, and then they left. The kids and I continued with our movie, and around 20 minutes later, there was another knock at our door. Again, it was the county deputies. They said, "Ma'am, we've received another 911 call from this address saying that you have an emergency." I politely explained to the officers that none of us had even left our chairs to go into the kitchen to make a phone call. The officer asked, "Ma'am, are you sure that no one made a call from this house?" I said, No one left the room to make a call. The kitchen was the only room that had a phone." So again, they leave, and we start a movie once more, feeling more than a little frustrated. No longer than we got comfortable and started to enjoy our movie. Would you believe it? There was another knock at the door. I got up and I answered it. Yep, more county deputies. Again, they'd received yet another 911 call from my address. By now, they were upset. They went on to tell me that abuse of 911 system was inexcusable and prosecutable, and they were going to take me to jail if it happened again. I told the officers that none of my children, nor I, had left the room to make any phone calls. As I'm leaning on the wall, an officer asked me to move away from the wall, and I did. He thought that someone was holding me hostage or something. These officers had had enough, and frankly, so had I. They were ready to leave, and again, they told me that just one more call from 911 from this address, and they were going to take me to jail. I was so scared that I would surely go to jail that night. But the officers left, and, thank God, no more calls. Years passed, and we moved out of that house. And a few weeks ago, a friend of mine was telling me about a farmer who lives there in that same house now. And that same thing happened to him. It's only called 911 on him once. The weird part is that he has no phone. He just happened to have his mother's cell phone in his pocket. He was up in his bedroom when suddenly he hears a female voice yelling to him to answer his phone in a very gruff voice. Well, he looks around like, what did I just hear? But continues to go about looking for what he was looking for in his room. When the voice comes again, "Answer your phone!" He examined his shirt pocket and thought, well, must be coming from my mother's cell phone. So he picks it up and answers it. It was a gruff lady and said, "What is your emergency?" He told the lady he had no emergency. He did not know what she was talking about. She said, "Well, we've received a 911 call from this address stating that you had an emergency." She kindly told him that there was no emergency to be had. That was the only time it's ever happened to him, but it's the same house that we lived in when it happened to us. I do not know this guy other than a very brief meeting with him in my driveway. That's our only connection to him. I don't know why the spirit would be calling 911 for us, and then years later for him. I wonder what their emergency was. Story 2. The Old City Cemetery. I used to be a police officer, a city cop. One night, my shift was working 11 to 7, the graveyard, when I heard one of my fellow officers call out over the radio at about 2 or 3 a.m. He was going to check out what appeared to be a fire within a fenced-in area of the Old City Cemetery. I then advised our dispatcher that I'd be en route to back him up. I was across town, so I had traveled about 2 to 3 minutes top when I heard the officer say 10-8, which means he's back in service. Then I thought to myself, why didn't he call for the fire department? So I called for him over the radio and told him to meet me at the parking lot of Blockbuster Video. When he pulled up beside of me in his patrol car, I could see that he had a scared look on his face. I asked, hey, what happened back at the cemetery? He said defensively, I don't want to talk about it. I again asked him what about the fire. He again shook it off and said he didn't want to talk about it, and drove off into the night. I thought to myself that I would give him a chance to clear his thoughts. So I waited to the end of the shift and asked him again what had happened. He told me he was patrolling on the north end of the street when he saw a small fire in the old city cemetery. He then stated that he went around the railroad tracks. Since it was around one of the holidays when they sell fireworks, he thought that somebody may have set off some firecrackers and they landed in the cemetery, causing a grass fire or something. He then called dispatch over the radio and advised her that he was going to check out the fire. He told me he exited his patrol unit, walked into the cemetery towards the fire. He said the flames from the fire were a good 8 to 9 feet high. He then told me that he noticed as he was walking towards the fire, the closer he got to that area, the flame was getting smaller. He said that when he got up to where the source of the fire was, it suddenly disappeared. There was no smoke, no trace of anything burning, nothing. He looked down to where the flames had disappeared, and he was standing in front of the grave, where someone had just been buried a couple days before. He then stated that he got really scared. He got back in his patrol car, and he left the area. Story 3. Hell House. I was terrorized for 3 years, and now I can finally let it go. I came into some money, just enough to buy some land and build a nice house. After searching for months, one came up in rural Pennsylvania, along a lonely 2-lane highway with no visible neighbors. It was well underpriced, 42 acres with a pond, and a burnt-out house foundation. There was an old spring house with a shed next to it. After making some inquiries, I was told by the owners that they had started a business out of state, and they were really desperate to move. It was a likely story. The former owners cashed my laughably small check and went missing, for lack of a better term, referring me to a local attorney to finish up the paperwork. Family and friends helped me demolish a modified house trailer over the old foundation to save money. I used the old foundation to have my little house built. Building was a frustrating process. Virtually everyone working on site was injured to varying degrees. The worst was an experienced carpenter that fell from the ladder and broke his knee. At the same time, I had a small barn built over the old barn's foundation. On that site, equipment kept constantly breaking down, but we pressed on, finishing the building in double the estimated time. On the evening of November 11th, 2003, I was finally moving my things into my new home. A full year after I had purchased the land. On the third trip, I found the house pitch black and smelling of smoke. Not having phone service yet, I tried to ring the fire department on my mobile phone, but it would not work. I drove as fast as I could into the tiny town 5 minutes away and borrowed the phone at a local club. The fire department came and heat tested my walls, and thankfully found no flames behind them. The remote control ceiling fans in the 2-story living room had scorch marks 2 feet in diameter around their bases. Everything was blown out. The TV, the fridge, the laundry, the furnace, the air conditioner, absolutely everything was destroyed. The firemen outside, inspecting with flashlights, found the problem. The neutral line had been pulled out of the main cables leading to the pole. The problem with that was, the line was 40 feet in the air, with a fenced-in dog yard below, where no one could have possibly touched it. The electrics inspector had checked it twice before the power was turned on. It took more than a month to get everything back in order. I am one of those people who buys extra warranties and insurance on everything. It paid off in this instance. The electric company swore that it was impossible for that line to have came loose. But they did repair it and pay for a few items in the end. New Year's came and went, and I began noticing strange things. Being single at the time, I didn't mind living alone, as I'd lived in a remote northwest Pennsylvania wilderness by myself and actually quite enjoyed it. This time around, it was different. I was feeling anxious, losing sleep, and generally feeling, as odd as it sounds, like someone was living with me, and I was drinking way too much coffee. The behavior of my animals changed as well. My 2 dogs, who usually stuck to me like glue, preferred to stay outside, no matter what the weather. They would come in for food, and then tear back outside through the dog door, as if their tails were on fire. They started barking and howling at nothing, at least nothing that I could see. I just assumed it was local wildlife winding them up. I had a couple of retired horses and a miniature donkey that started acting strange as well. The donkey was always virtually silent, but he began baying several times a day. The horses were becoming fearful and difficult to handle, very unusual for them. I assumed at first that it was their age. They were having trouble adjusting to their new surroundings. My 2 parrots that I had in a giant 2-story cage custom built for, and had been a part of our family for years, also started acting strange. They stopped talking and playing, preferring to hide at the top of the cage, instead of clamoring for attention, as they always had. That winter was very difficult. The gas furnace had a safety shut-off part that had to be replaced to turn the furnace back on. Several times in the dead of night, I would hear it break. Thankfully, I had a very understanding repairman who would drive through the snow at night to repair it. During the blowout, I had a small fireplace that I used to keep me and my pets warm. Occasionally, the flames would roar up the chimney, as though a blast of wind came through, but there wasn't one. Eventually, I had the furnace replaced with a different brand, only to have problems with that one as well. As the months wore on, the feelings got worse. I was constantly clearing my throat, and had developed a habit of picking at my cuticles. I was having horrific nightmares, terrible stuff that my brain couldn't possibly generate. I would wake up, sometimes screaming or crying. I would feel a very deep depression and sadness that would last half the day. I would come home from work to find different electrical things on. Lamps, TV, coffee maker, all sorts of things. Once I came in to find the guest room bathroom faucets open full blast. I chalked it up to me just being exhausted, but others started being affected as well. Some of my friends stayed over in the guest room for a weekend country getaway. Whenever I had guests over, I would always ask them how their night went. Few would say they had nightmares, as I did, but I always kept quiet. A good friend had an 18-month-old son, the happiest baby I have ever seen. She brought him along for a visit. The little guy was very inquisitive and always into things. He loved to toddle around and explore, but suddenly at my house, he was afraid to leave his mother's lap. He stuck to her like glue for the entire visit. Also during this time, I had a security system installed that had a door open notifier that would ding ding anytime a door was open. It started to ding ding all the time when no one was around or near the doors. The security company came and inspected the whole system, and they even replaced a few parts, even though they found nothing wrong with the system. It didn't help. It still sounded at all hours of the day and night. I really became worried when, one summer night, I felt something poke me in the back, even though I was all alone. A week or two later, I was terrified one morning to open the blinds in my upstairs bedroom, the same wall that the power came into, to find a greasy ear print on the outside glass, 40 feet in the air, on a sheer wall. I was so scared that I was physically sick. I took a picture of it with the disposal camera, and when I got the print back, it was all black. All the other pictures were fine, and it was a beautiful, clear, bright morning. That was about the time that I let myself believe that there was something going on in the house. But I didn't say anything to anyone else. I started visiting a local friendly bar, and was getting to know my community. When they heard that I bought the old farm, they would give me a funny look and change the subject pretty fast. I asked one of my new friends why they did that, and he took me to the back room and gave me some shocking news. My friend, I'll call him Fred, his father, who has since passed on, was a lifelong local firefighter. The short version of the story was that both the barn and the house had burnt down twice, and there were bodies discovered. But back then, they didn't have any forensics or resources to identify them. And not many people cared or got involved with those type of people. Next, he told me that his family had been friendly with the first owners, before the ones that I had bought the place from. And that farming family had been touched by tragedy many times. The final blow came when he informed me that the wife of the couple that I had bought the house from was on husband number 4. 2 husbands had committed suicide, suspiciously committed suicide. And one husband just disappeared, and he's never been seen or heard from again. Neither she nor her husband informed me of that. A few years later, the company I was working for had been struggling for some time. They were forced to close down, and I was out of a job. The local economy was not in good shape, and I didn't fancy the idea of being unemployed, stuck in a house that I'd come to fear. So I decided to finish my college education. I had just enough savings to squeak by with financial aid to go back to school. I spent much of my time on campus as I could, but I did have animals to care for, so I had to spend some time with them on the farm. My pets were virtually strangers to me. My elderly horse, who, like the others, went in and out of the barn as they pleased, developed a pacing habit. He usually spent much of his life dozing, but would pace outside of the barn sometimes for an hour straight. I tried everything I could to help him, but I worried about how all of this would end. I had started dating somebody, and when he came near the animals, they would shy away, as they started doing with everyone. That relationship ended with petty arguments and heated emotions, something that was not like me. Again, alone, I'd be home studying when I'd feel something that I still to this day shudder at. I could feel a sense of someone very, very evil about an inch from the side of my face. I would have to go outside to shake it off. But a few days later, the feeling would be back. There were all those symptoms that you see on those paranormal TV shows. Phones ringing when no one was there, cold wind with no source, ghastly stenches with no source. I confided in my grandmother with confidence, who suggested I go see someone about stress. And I did. After the first therapy session, I returned the next week to find the doctor trying to push sleeping pills on me. I didn't like the prospect of being in that house under the influence of sleeping pills, especially not with those nightmares. So I quit going. I was having little accidents around the house, like riding my 1-year-old exercise bike and the pedal snapped off. I got a nasty shock from my curling iron. I was burnt by a pot handle on the stove that had been sitting there with the stove off for 20 minutes. I wasn't feeling well and was rarely sick in the past. I started getting migraines and heartburn. I've always been really thin, but my weight dropped to 93 pounds. I was absolutely exhausted. But I didn't have the time to rest because a new problem started. I've always kept my home clean, especially to keep my pets healthy, but dust would appear in hours. I kept my furnace and air filters clean, but it was no use. I had a repairman check my entire system to find nothing amiss. Dust was everywhere, all the time. I would come home from school, and there it would be again. This lasted for about 6 weeks, and then it stopped as quickly as it started. By late summer, my dear old friend split up with his partner of 5 years and came to stay with me. He was a tax preparer and worked from home. He set up shop at my house. For about a week, things were relatively quiet. Oh, but that didn't last long. I heard Dave, not his real name by the way, open the guest bedroom door and say, "What?" Then he yelled upstairs to ask what I wanted. I told him I didn't come back downstairs. He went back to sleep. I sat awake, devastated, that the peace and quiet was gone. The next morning I sat Dave down and told him what was happening. He was skeptical, but listened to everything that I had to say. As weeks went on, the knocking on his door continued, even though he slept with it open. One night, he came into my room screaming, "What? What in the world do they want?" He grabbed a pillow and threw it across the room as hard as he could. This is not normal for Dave, and he literally wouldn't hurt a fly. I shook him and set him down, and he began to cry. He said that something keeps knocking on his door, and after that, he slept on the sofa for a week. He started experiencing the same things I did when he was alone in the house. The phone ringing, the ding-ding from the door notifier, the feeling sad and anxious, the dogs not wanting to come in to eat. He was always very proud of being mega healthy, organic, exercise daily. He began to drink, even though before this he referred to alcohol as poisonous liver killer. He decided that he wanted some pet chickens, so he bought a dozen and settled them in. I had owned chickens before and knew that I had to keep them in a stall for a week or two so they wouldn't wander off when we let them out during the day. When we did let them out one Sunday morning, they scattered in all directions, screaming. 6 were found at the neighbor's farm 2 miles down the road, where I told the farmer he could keep them. The other 6 were never found. One evening we were having some wine on the side porch next to the old spring house. The spring house had a shed on top of it, with steps leading down without a door. We were having a whining session about X's when there was suddenly a bright flash of light, as though someone was welding. Dave saw it directly. I saw it reflected through the sliding glass door. There was no power to the spring house. We ran into the house and locked the doors. We stayed up that night, saying very little to each other. About this time, one of the most annoying things of this whole ordeal showed up. Flies. House flies. In every single room. I probably killed at least 10 to 15 a day. I would hear Dave swearing as they landed on him at night, waking him up out of a little sleep he got. We both kept the house spotless, and what straw manure came from the barn wasn't taken to the garden center, I stored away at the back of the farm. I kept the barn in show condition. It had less flies in it than the house did. We checked all the screens and the dog flap. There were no openings for them to be getting in. We started blaming each other, arguing about who brought what into the house. Soon after the flash in the spring house, I was leaving for class. I turned my mobile on. Dave had left several messages, and I rang him back directly. He said he was parked on campus and for me to meet him there. He got out of his car. He was sickly white and shaking. He pulled up his sleeve. There was a bruise on his arm. He showed me bruises on his legs and on his ribs. He said that he was in the downstairs toilet, having a pee, when something shoved him from behind hard enough to knock him over into the toilet tank and sink. He flatly said that we're going home, and he's packing his things, and he asked me to do the same. We argued in the house as he was packing. He begged me to leave with him, but I couldn't. Where was I supposed to go with dogs, horses, and parrots? Communication broke down between us after he left. Phone calls would dissolve into arguments about my safety. The last time he contacted me, he was living with his mother. That winter was horrible. Along with everything else going on, my parrots began to scream this unholy, ear-splitting noise in the middle of the night. It got so bad that I found an avian specialist. He was at an absolute loss, telling me that birds are instinctively quiet in the dark. We tried several methods to get them to stop, to no avail. Soon afterwards, they also began flying into the cage bars. One eventually injured himself. I found a sanctuary to send them to, and, with a lot of tears, I left them there. From what I'm told, they have fully recovered. One evening, I went to see a holiday show on campus, along with some older students. We made plans to go out for drinks afterwards, and since I don't drink or drive, 2 of them, that shared an apartment, offered to put me up for the night. Since it was very cold and windy, I brought the dogs in, slid the aluminum locking panel on the top flap of the dog door. When I came home the next morning, I found my front door ripped to shreds. The glass panel was virtually opaque with scratches. at the bottom. The wood frame was gone. The pet door panel and step below was all scratched as well. They had never done anything like that before. They were so reluctant to come into the house that I built 2 large, heated boxes outside for them. They refused to stay in the house for more than 10 minutes at a time. By the middle of 2006, this thing was running my life. I cut my classes down to part-time. I got a part-time job at the campus bookstore. But again, I had to go home and care for my animals. I would waffle between numbness and rage. When I was numb, I would ignore all the things happening around me, turn off the TV that would come on by itself, hanging up the phone when there was no one there, stay up at night with the presence around me, just staring or reading. When I felt rage, I would scream and swear as loud as I could at the thing, throwing things, just getting into a right state. By August, I took the opportunity to study abroad. I had arranged for a couple I had known for years to stay and look after my animals. 2 weeks later, my parents phoned to tell me that the couple had left, leaving an excuse of an ill relative. My gracious parents saved the day by tending the animals twice a day so I could complete the program. I never bothered to contact the couple after that, not only angry that they left me high and dry, but also didn't want to know exactly what experiences, if any, they had. They made no effort to contact me either. My experience abroad was amazing. I found out later that I was staying in an ancient building that was on the site of an abbey where monks had lived. The second I dragged my bags into my room, I got that warm, fuzzy feeling that I hadn't felt in years. We had a few days to settle in, and the first day I fell asleep around 7 p.m. I didn't get up the next day until around noon, something I never do. For a short time, I was really completely home and comfortable. I met a wonderful man, and we very quickly fell in love. I felt confident enough to tell him my experiences. In his culture, the supernatural is more accepted than in the United States. Not only did he believe me, but he encouraged me to work through my traumas. I returned to America and immediately set things in motion. I found good homes for my animals, sold what household goods I could, found a trustworthy real estate agent that would sell my place without direct contact between me and potential buyers. I sold the place for next to nothing. I didn't care. I'm now happily living abroad, sharing my guy's business, having a great life, paranormal free.